I can introduce you as your bio says and all that, but I'd rather have you introduce yourself as you'd like to be known and get
Okay.
into it.
Um, all right. Well, just give me a second. I have to get into the role.
Okay.
Um, uh, my name is John Barton. I'm a poet who lives in Victoria, BC, on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking peoples. Um, I've been writing for over 40 years. I've published 13 books of poems. My most recent book just came out, Compulsory Figures, from Caitlin Press. Um, my life has been largely dedicated to the written word. I've worked in most aspects of what I call the life cycle of the book, from writing it to editing them to publishing them, either as a poetry editor for a literary press or as the editor of two nationally known literary magazines, the Mel Hat Review and Art Poetry Magazine. And I'm also a trained librarian, so I've circulated books. The only thing I haven't done is I've never worked in a bookstore.
Okay. Okay. Um, and um, as I was reading Compulsory Figures, it was really the themes. There was some themes like especially in the beginning, themes around your family where you caught it so well that I had to walk away because it reminded me of themes in my family or my wife's family, and they it really hit hard. So I kind of didn't come up with definite questions about um, the book itself. I just wanted to talk about some of the themes you uh, hit on during it because, like at the beginning, you come right in, you're setting up, like I'm assuming it's all autobiographical. You weren't putting yourself into someone else's uh,
I think
place.
that's a fair observation.
Okay, that I figured that with poetry, but then it would have ruined all
Well,
this if you would
yeah,
have been like, well, it was someone else's life I was
yeah.
channeling.
So it's definitely my life. And it's kind of what I would say is that certainly the poems originate in autobiography. Um, when I think about them, I don't really think that they're embroidered in any particular way, um, in the sense that um, I started with facts and I massaged them into something slightly different than my own experience,
Okay.
which is often what happens.
Mhm.
Um, some poets will try and distance themselves from the poems in a way and say it's a persona. I wouldn't say that's the case about these poems. Um, it's interesting. Uh, 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 I mean, I have one surviving sister, and I'm sure that she would see things differently than I do, simply because A, we're 13 years apart, and we experienced things in that I'm recounting at different stages of our lives.
Mhm.
She was almost 13 when I was born, and so um, she was away. She had left home by the time I was 6, and
Okay.
um, so and, and the other thing I would say is that I'm going wholly on the basis of memory. So I'm not exactly going back and, well, to use the word verifying anything. Um,
Okay.
I think a good example would be in the opening poem. So, goes like, I'm going to get the title wrong. I get the titles wrong now. Um, uh, Already so uh, ghost-like under the elms.
Mm.
He lived in the house that's being described um, in that poem for the first 2 years of my life. So I really have no memories of that house. But
Okay.
I remember being told that the elm trees that I'm describing arrived by mail and were planted. I don't know if that's
Okay.
true, but it may as well be true in
Yeah.
that sense. And it's true for me. And then the next poem, The Lost Epistles of Margie, I did find the letters that I'm discussing in that
Mm.
uh, poem in my father's desk after he died. They all were mailed um, to my father at his business address in the month prior to my birth. And they were written by a woman I never even knew existed until I met them and read them and realized in the writing of them, or in the reading them, that he'd had an affair the whole year before I was born um, with this woman whom
Okay.
my sisters remembered because she lived down the street. And
Okay.
so,
It's
yeah, and it was kind of that poem was a revelation. That experience was a revelation to me because I thought I was born into the house that had to continue after that affair came to an end. Well, I don't know if my mother knew about it. I'm pretty sure she did. Um, and I kept thinking about what she must have experienced with that knowledge. And that poem is all built around hearsay in a way, or evidentiary poem. My aunt did say to me, we never knew you were coming along until you were born. We were never told by your mother that she was
mm,
pregnant. And I was told by my mother that I was supposed to be named after my father's father, and I'm named after my mother's father. And so you start putting all the pieces together,
mhm.
and you begin to have a different conception of the circumstances of your life.
Yeah.
And for me, it was, I don't know, what the word was, profoundly moving to me. Um, uh, it it's almost hard to articulate in the sense that it made things make sense, but I couldn't define what that sense is, except I know that if I'm honest, it was an unhappy home to grow up in.
Okay.
And not that there wasn't love in that house or affection, or we weren't taken well care of because we were, all those things, but um, there was an unhappiness at its core.
I believe somewhere in there you described it as like a high pressure system and a low pressure system um, existing together.
Yeah,
Or
I'm sure it's sometimes I don't remember everything, but yeah, certainly the two of them were very different people, my parents, and anyone who's grown up in a family, which we all did,
mm,
um, realizes that, our parents are distinct systems that interact in good and bad ways. And
Uh,
you know,
that's
what I would say, I mean, it's not the first time I've written about them, that's for sure. Um, and the thing that surprised me in a way that I wrote about them this time is I never expected to.
yeah,
That long poem, Lost Epistles of Margie, I always thought it would be an essay. I thought it was more the um, content for a personal essay. And just one day I wrote down the first stanza, and then the rest of the poem came, and it kind of opened everything else up in that in the first two sections of the book, I suppose. And because the next section deals with my parents' divorce, and
yeah,
I'd never written really about it before, and I was surprised that I did. And I was surprised that it affected me so deeply in the composition of those poems. I felt raw in the composition of those poems. And a friend said to me something interesting, that she felt it was only later in one's life that you can really come to terms with those kinds of things. 'Cause,
mhm,
my parents separated when I was 22. Um, well, my father felt that, we were all grown and it shouldn't affect us. But of course it did.
yeah,
And really, that's what those poems are about.
mm,
Um,
yeah. Are we ever all grown? It's
I don't know. It's an evolution.
yeah,
I suppose
um,
what I feel is I don't hold any I don't hold any grudge anymore
okay.
about
Y-
them.
Yeah, and then as you moved from there into their deaths, and your mom's illness near the end, um, that that's kind of the stage in life I've been, my wife and I too. So that was really relatable, and that's one of those things that really I had to set it down and go, this guy's this guy's getting this too, or, well, not too sharply, but it's so relatable that, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, my mother's dementia. Uh, so my grandmother, her mother,
mhm,
lived with us for a few years when I was young. Um, say she moved in with us when I was 11 and was really with us for 3 to 4 years. And she kind of shunted back and forth between my mother and my uncle. But she had dementia, and not initially when she moved in, but um, latterly. Uh, and I think because of that, it was familiar to me.
okay,
And I remember my mother's she had a hard time with it, I think, initially, in the sense that she would try and, or when my grandmother was more kind of competent but failing, she would argue with her about the memories that my grandmother was mixing up. And I knew in observing that uh, it wasn't fair and it wasn't right. Um, and so when my mother went through it, and if and I wasn't the person taking care of her necessarily, but none of that mattered to me. And I also kind of found it fascinating to observe um, how it worked. The way I describe dementia is it's like you're in a kind of free fall, unconnected to time and space, and you're just falling through it, and everything is the present. regardless if it's the past or the actual present. And that's what's real at the time for them. And I don't know, there's something to me that's, well, humbling about it. And it's real to them, and it's therefore real to me. And, I mean, I think I have it in the book. At a certain stage, my mother lived in Calgary, which is where I grew up, and where my sister lived, who she was living with. And I came back to help out. And my mother looked up at me and said, "Whenever I think of you, I think of an 8-year-old boy."
Yeah, that's
Um,
in
that,
there.
yeah, that hit me deeply. Um, yeah, it was, yeah, I found it moving. I also found it amusing, and I usually characterize it characterize it through the lens of humor, in that, well, now I know why you've treated me the way you have all my life, because I never grew up to you. Um, I don't think that's actually very accurate, but it's certainly to me funny. Um, but and the dementia also, if I had ever any doubts about my mother loving me, they disappeared, because she was so direct um, in how she felt, um, and nothing was held back. So yeah, I found that tremendously.
When when you say nothing was held back, so like I've had experiences with people who kind of lose the they stop holding back. And it sounds like there was a lot of good stuff for you because of that. Was there the opposite as well? It
She
was
was, of course, very difficult at times to handle.
okay.
I mean, I wasn't the person caring for her, so I wasn't affected by it as much.
Okay.
But she lived with my sister, who was a doctor. She set up kind of a nursing home for one, with 24-hour nursing care, a lot of safety,
Okay.
and a lot of certainty. And but yeah, she was a difficult person, as a throughout her life, I suspect, certainly, and so she was a difficult person at the end. I do think dementia brings out, like, the character doesn't change. I know that people, I think in later stages it does, um, because I mean, it is a physical deterioration of the brain.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, she had her moments. Uh,
Okay.
uh,
Um, yeah, and then after that part, the book um kind of went through your ancestry somewhat and kind of from the East Coast to the West Coast or travel for you too.
there's
And
an element of that. Yeah, I can see that. It wasn't necessarily a conscious decision to structure it that way, but uh, you know, I I sometimes think that what holds the book together is actually the idea of the father. It begins with the father. In the next section, it's about the father's impact on the family by leaving. And then, of course, there's the family deaths, my mother, my father, my sister. Um, and in a way, the reduction of the family. And then the next section, which is a kind of does make a kind of a shift, it's built around ideas of patriarchy. Um, and then the last section, which is the most exclusively queer part, is about, interact, interactions with other kind of mentor figures, like the writers that I was inspired by. So the father becomes mentor uh, in that sense. And the other thing I didn't really think about until after the book was finished is that it kind of goes full circle. It goes from, you know, the nuclear family based on marriage and ends on a poem about gay marriage, about the ratification um, of gay marriage in the United States, because I just happened to be in San Francisco the week that the Supreme Court ruling came down. And it was also coincided with gay pride in San Francisco. And so it was all, I didn't intend to be there at that time, but it was there because it was the the summer, the late spring after my sister died suddenly, and a friend of mine suggested I join him down there, and because he was going to a conference. So I anyway, so it's kind of this full circle um, that I sort of subconsciously um, crafted in that book. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, so the fourth section deals with kind of my family's relationship to Canadian history um, as settlers, and sort of the being implicated through um, you know what your ancestors did, uh,
Hmm.
uh, and trying to understand as tentatively as one I feel it can as a settler, the impact or your culpability
Yeah.
in this situation.
Okay. And also in that last part, when you're talking about culpability and well, there's something I want to hit on with since you brought up gay marriage and uh, the how I want to hit on. You wrote an essay a few years back. I believe I read it on the Walrus
Yes.
website. But so I want to get to um, that, but there's darker themes coinciding. Just themes around climate change and smoke from forest fires. Like the poems seem to have darker elements as like, as I mean, there's dark elements early on too when we're talking about dementia and things like that. Those are dark elements for us, but you get into more like mention of I believe at one point you're mentioning diesel washing up on beaches and you go into homelessness and those types of themes. It does get darker as it gets more into where we're living now. So,
Right. Right. Again, I it's sort of, I mean, it sometimes you can make too neat an equation between things. And so I guess I grouped all those things in that section about um, patriarchy, family history, sort of the impact of a certain kind of decision making that um, suggests that the powers that be um, can act and have consequences in our lives, and that somehow we're all kind of implicated in those decisions. And in a way, I suppose I'm suggesting that I, like all of us, am a witness to history. That
Okay.
history has its origins in the past actions of those who came before us, and then we watch and um, witness how they unfold through the course of our lives. Um, and whether we have much agency or influence over how those things unfold is is the question, I suppose. I don't necessarily think I answered that question or sought to answer it, but
Okay.
I wanted um, to articulate what I have been seeing and uh, as at least some in some effort not to look away. And the poem about the forest fires, that poem I wrote, I don't know, probably in around 2021,
Okay.
I suspect. I'm just trying to think, and or even maybe, yeah, around then, during the pandemic and Victoria, which of course was where I live, we had 7 or 8 weeks of solid smoke. Um,
Okay.
and most of it blew up from California and Oregon, because that's where smoke comes from for us largely. Washington State, it's not going to blow over the mountains because the winds go the wrong way.
Yeah.
And so I mean, it's a perverse joke, but I imagine myself, I was breathing in the ash of redwoods.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of awe-inspiring
Mm-hmm.
to to experience, and I wanted to put that um, into words. And awe, I mean, if you look up awe, it doesn't necessarily mean, it can mean terror as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what was important to me. In the poem about homelessness, I live very close to a very large park in Victoria that during the height of the pandemic, probably there were 100 to 150 tents um, in the park, caused a lot of it was very contentious. I had no problems with them being there, but a lot of people did. And I was struck by how the pandemic made homelessness so much more apparent to us because they had to come out of the shadows. Um, uh, and they kind of grouped together, and they were dealing with it just as much as we were, the pandemic, if not, we're more made vulnerable by it than I ever was. Um, and uh, yeah, it's a, it it's about a recognition of shared humanity, and you know, there's something about growing up in an unhappy home or being put through an acrimonious divorce that's dehumanizing in the same way that it's dehumanizing to be put through tremendous social change as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to give some voice to that.
Okay. And now I'll move on to what I wanted to talk to you about that essay that you had printed in the Walrus, where you were talking about Justin Trudeau apologizing and
Yes,
for
yes. I was commissioned to write that essay
okay,
for a small chapbook publisher in Ontario called Anne Struther Press. And
okay,
it was motivated. It was just after Justin Trudeau apologized to the queer community, most particularly to LGBTQ civil servants who may have been let go from their jobs because of their sexual orientation over the course of, you know, um, decades, and whether they
mm,
worked for the civil service or were in the military. And I suppose at the back of that essay is the idea that now that all of the all the legal rights have come to gay people, there's this a conclusion drawn that everything is fine
mm,
when um, it isn't necessarily. And also around that time, the Canada Council um, revised its funding model, um, and um, they claimed I only really noticed it once on the website, but they said we've now brought our guidelines into compliance with the Employment Equity Act of Canada, which was passed in the mid 80s, and as far as I know, has never been revised since. And
okay,
that act, I used to live in Ottawa, so I was well aware of the act because it was always cited at the bottom of every job posting that this is in compliance with the Employment Equity Act. And so there's four areas of protection: um, Indigenous peoples, women, uh, visible minorities, and deaf and disabled. And the Canada
okay,
Council um, and so, of course, the act itself it's determined by the times in which it was written, and it was was passed before sexual orientation was added to the Canadian Human Rights Code, for example. So it doesn't
okay,
reflect that. And so not only they bring it up into compliance, but they drop their protections or the clauses about the support of women writers, and they don't add LGBTQ. And
okay,
I just thought this is specious and and uh, and kind of um, destructive, and they needed to be called out on it. Not that that's changed anything. Um, but now, I wrote that essay um, was in a book that I published in 2019. So I wrote that essay around 2018, I suspect. And of course, we now uh, are, they say that uh, the hate crimes against gay people have increased in Canada over the last 4 or 5 years by 300%, for
yeah,
example. Um, And I always think that the best measure will be when things are truly fine is when the suicide rate among LGBTQ youth is the same as the national average. You know that
mm,
because I consider kids to be the most vulnerable of
yeah,
all uh, people in society. Um,
yeah,
and so that's where the essay came from. And I kind of try and take apart the Canada Council position of that. Um,
okay. Yeah, because I noticed it sometime over the last 7 years. It wasn't just printed when I found it, but um, I mean, I found it because it seemed like things were. I live in a really small town in Ontario, in a very conservative area.
Right.
Um, so, but it seemed like things were improving and acceptance was getting better. And then, probably mostly since Trump got back in, it's totally gone the other way. This is like a Maple MAGA area,
Right.
and yeah, it's just if you or if people were seeing that the equality that we thought we were seeing wasn't there in 2018, it just seems so much worse now than it did even 7 years ago.
Yeah, I think what Trump has done and what, as you call it, Maple MAGA has done is it's given people permission to vocalize their deeply held beliefs that there wasn't as much social license for in the past. And, and I mean, having grown up in a very homophobic environment, in Alberta, um, uh, I never, I never believed that tolerance was slam dunk, and I thought, history shows things. There's flux, it fluctuates, and
Mhm.
so while it disturbs me that the temperature has changed in tolerance, um, I'm more saddened than surprised, and I think it probably is very disturbing to younger people who've grown up in that tolerance and
Mhm.
have felt the social license to be themselves.
Yeah.
Uh, but to older people like me, I'm sure that it it just feels like more of the same.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so, I mean, what happened in Alberta over you know, the government directing school boards to withdraw sexually explicit materials from the schools, which, normally usually means that they're targeting LGBTQ materials.
Mhm.
What happened there, where some brave person in the Edmonton School Board leaked the list to the press. I mean, that person, to me, whoever chose to do it, um, did a great service to the community. And I love the term that Daniel Smith used when she had to deal with the political fallout. That, of course, they're backing away and saying, we never meant classics to be withdrawn. And this is vicious compliance. I love that term. I thought it was it was it was droll and perverse and we need more of that kind of pushback um, in society today. Um, but this is not the end of it. It's will continue. And the Alberta government is, contemplating, the use of the notwithstanding clause if their legislation to um, limit the rights of transgender people and children goes through, is thrown out by the Supreme Court. So, we just live in a different time. Uh, you know, so, I guess in a way, all those forces, we live among those forces, and I suppose that section in Compulsory Figures that deals with social change um, is trying to reflect how what it is to live in those forces without necessarily um, um, either apportioning blame or coming up with a solution, or but it's witness, I suppose. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like, um, I guess I'll kind of close that out by telling you, a friend of mine said that the the fear of coming out wasn't nearly as bad as the fear they're having right now of being put back in the closet.
Um, that's not a I'm not too that's an interesting observation. I would say that having had your personal freedom
Mm,
uh, and to be able to live your life as normally as um, anyone else in society, to have that withdrawn is a frightening concept. And I listened to this podcast about Antifa recently, the idea of Antifa and the anti-fascist movement. And one of the things that they said, and that was interesting to me about the right and the extreme right and fascist motivated extreme right, is the way they um, obtain purchase and credence in society is by floating the idea of family values and normalizing. And so we see those forces at play, certainly in the United States, and we see them here as well. Um, and it's almost a bit like giving society a bit of it's like getting freezing before you have the tooth removed. Uh,
yeah. Okay. That's an interesting way to put that, but yeah. Um, okay. I think that's all I wanted to hit on, and the book has been amazing. Like I said, it's been very moving in ways that make it worth reading, but have been hard just because of what it pulls out in me, which I think
well, thank you.
if I was a poet, that's what I'd want. Like that's a
Oh, yeah. No,
um
the idea, I mean, to me, what a poem is it's not just what I put on the page, it's what you as the reader bring to it. The
mhm.
poem, in that way, every reading of the poem, of the book, makes the poem unique.
Yeah.
Um, and, in particular, and that's the idea. Um, and, I have my, um, you know, there's there's things, of course, that I want you to feel, and that's where my skills are required. But if it spurs you to feel things, then that is a bit of immortality.
Hmm. So, is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, I can't think of anything. I mean, I could talk for hours, but no.
Okay. Well, it's been great to talk to you. It was really great to meet you, and
Thank you
um,
for asking.